everybody. I'm Karen Hartglass. You are listening to It's All About Food. Thank you once again for joining me. I'm so glad you're here. This is a very interesting topic we're going to jump into. We've touched on something like this, not exactly over the last 15 years that I've been doing this podcast. And you won't be surprised, of course, this podcast is called It's All About Food. And although we're not going to always be talking about food, it is connected. All those dots out there, when we draw the lines together, in my opinion, lead to the food that we eat. I am going to introduce my guest today, Bill Hatcher, the author of The Red Planet, Gendered Landscapes and Violent Inequalities. Bill Hatcher has instructed geography and anthropology courses since 1994. He also researches and writes about the intersection of some of our favorite topics: misogyny, racism, religion, animal cruelty, meat eating, and environmental degradation. Bill now teaches in Southern Colorado, where he lives with his wife, Kim. Welcome, Bill, to It's All About Food.
Karen, thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Now, your book has been published by Lantern Publishing, and you have several other books that were also published by Lantern. The Marble Room and Principles of Flight.
Yes.
But I didn't read them. They both sound interesting. We love Lantern Publishing, and I'm happy to promote as many books of theirs that I can.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning those other two books.
Yeah. Okay. The Red Planet. In a mere, I don't know how many pages this book is, but a little over 200 pages. You kind of cover just our history for the last, 15,000 plus years.
Right. It's a ton. It's a ton packed into those 200 or so pages. And that was the greatest challenge, I think, was shrink wrapping everything down, all of these huge topics, into something that's cohesive and digestible, as it were, and in a general nonfiction form. Yeah.
So I'm guessing, and you can clarify this, one of the reasons you wrote the book is when we can understand how we got to where we are today, it can help us perhaps plan a better future and
Absolutely.
resolve some of the many issues we're experiencing on our planet today.
Absolutely. I think that's, that's certainly something that I believe firmly in, is understanding where we came from, who we really are, because there are so many myths and so much misinformation, disinformation too, that's woven into these myths of who we think we are and have to be, and so pinning down some of the truths, some of the facts, some of the information from our history, going from way back, bringing it into the present day, and helping to chart healthier, sustainable, regenerative directions in our future, for us and the planet, because hey, we're in this together, for sure.
I, like many people, as we age, we get more cynical. And yet your book is full of hope towards the end, and we don't have to get to that immediately, because I'd like to touch on different things you've touched on in the book, but you do have this hopeful outlook, which I appreciate. It's encouraging. It's kind of hard not to live without hope.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I do also, as I'm sure you'll bring out, I lean on the help from some other academics in the field of anthropology and geography, and English literature, to help me tell this story and make it hopeful, and yeah, pull on those hopeful strings, certainly, that Dr. Jennifer Fleury does so well, I think, in the foreword for the book, for example, and in a few other commentaries on the book as well.
Okay, The Red Planet, Gendered Landscapes and Violent Inequalities. Gendered landscapes. I I don't know when or if I have read or heard about this term before. I know it's been around for decades, but maybe I ignored it or just brushed over it. But can you just briefly talk about what gendered landscapes and gendered landscape theory entails?
Sure, sure, absolutely. Uh, that is what the book is formulated around, and uh, the notion that landscapes have helped inform our understandings of ourselves as a species and how we have reinterpreted and projected that back out onto the landscapes, and what we how we perceive the world around us. And this goes everything I think that people will be able to connect with, maybe in a more modern um, notion is how certain vehicles are more or less masculine or feminine, or architecture is gendered masculine or feminine, say clothing masculine and feminine. And so there are landscapes that um, have certain more feminine characteristics of being lush and nurturing and helpful and helping to support human life and life in general, and those that are more masculine landscapes that are harsh and rugged and more difficult to live in and make a living from, not only for humans but for other animals as well. And so these are the gendered landscapes that have helped to inform how we eke a living from the planet and interpret ourselves too. So that's where it's centered around, certainly.
Gender is a very important topic today. And perhaps you can also clarify a little bit the difference between masculine and feminine versus male and female and all that goes in between those two.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, these are terms that come down to us that have been really misused oftentimes and misinterpreted, masculine, feminine, and we often conflate them with being male or female in a binary sense, and masculine and feminine being those gendered terms that all of us embody some portion of, masculine, feminine, and at different times in our lives, we are more masculine and more feminine. And of course, across a range of possibilities of gender, of masculinity and femininity. Um, and therefore, there's certainly, I think I bring up the example in my book of a census that we might fill out, a census form that asks what your gender is. And of course, we're okay, or am I male gender or am I female gender? And that's a little bit incorrect in saying it that way, since we're talking about sex, which would be male or female, and even those operate across a spectrum, male, more female, and intersex as well. Every 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 2,000 people in the world are intersex and born with, genitalia that are not definitively masculine, male, I should say, or female. And depending on the population, there's even a population in the Caribbean island of Hispaniola who are neither male or female until puberty, and then they
Wow.
become male or female. And so there's quite this dynamic, this fluidity of sex, certainly, and also even more so, I would argue, of gender. Anything between, way out on one end being uh, very masculine, more masculine more of the time, and feminine on the other end of the spectrum more of the time. And again, all of us are some combination of these genders of masculine and feminine characteristics.
I'm sighing here for a moment because with so much obvious natural evidence of male and female and the spectrum in between, it is so unfortunate that humans want to push back at this and want something more black and white and will exploit and discriminate all those that come in between.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's not our natural nature, you tell us.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. In fact, this binary of it's male or it's female, and that's the end of the story, black or white, night or day, or any other binary that you can think. That's certainly a mode of thinking that we have that has been grown into us from the hyper masculine paradigm, what I call it, and into creating a binary system in the world and whatever we see. So certainly that's not who we are originally, and that's certainly not who we are also physically, physiologically, anatomically. We are not either these males or females. We're not even originally, as we might like to think, some of us, as carnivores or even we are certainly omnivores, technically speaking, but we come from a very herbivorous beginning, and so all of these notions have changed throughout history. And not sure which direction you wanted to go with from here. There are so many ways we can
Yes,
take this.
definitely. And we'll see where it goes. I've made some notes, but I can also be very spontaneous, and you're free to bring up anything that you think is important.
All right.
I want to just for a moment to give credit to Jim Mason, the author of An Unnatural Order, The Roots of Our Destruction of Nature. Are you familiar with that book?
I've heard the book. I apologize, I've not read it. So
That's okay. It had a profound impact on me when it first came out, I believe the early 90s, and I recently had the opportunity to interview Jim with the revised edition. But the reason why I mention it is because he also goes back some 10,000 years and tries to understand and explain how we got here.
hmm.
And one of the things that I remember was talking about the start of agriculture and how that was kind of one of the beginnings of our demise. As agriculture started, hierarchy started,
Mm-hmm.
and we found more and more ways to find reason for fault in people and in animals that weren't like us, or we had reason to make some better and some worse. You might want to read it.
Certainly, yeah. No, it's on my list.
Oh, good. It's on. So many books to read.
So many.
Right. So in the beginning of the book, you mentioned some 15,000. No, did I write this wrong? 156,000 years ago before present? Was it that long ago? Did I type it wrong? Foragers had plenty to eat.
Okay. Yes. Yes, foragers. That's who we have been most of our existence on the planet. And yes, foraging, certainly 150,000 years and more ago, we have been foragers for most of our existence. And a very few of us continue to be foragers today. 200 to 250,000 people in the world are nominal foragers left in the world today. But that number, I mean, even many of those peoples have occasional seasons in which they live next to a town and they are part of an economy in a little village somewhere, more and more. So I think you might be referring to Marshall Solins, anthropologist of the 1960s, who talked about the original affluence of foragers, and how they always had enough or knew where they were going to get their next meal and actually did less work than agriculturalists. Agriculturalists and pastoralists who were working on finding their next meal, for 10, 12, 15, 16 hours or more a day, whereas foragers were only spending, 15 hours a week, finding their food. And so they were the original affluent, leisure societies and peoples in the world. Most of the time, of course, there no doubt were occasional times of famine and hardship as well. And that's how life tends to work. But comparatively, that's what he was referring to.
I just remember over time hearing that humanity's been so much better off since agriculture started, and we've been able to produce more food and feed more people. But at the same time, there are more people on the planet and more people starving.
Mm.
I don't know, has it solved our problems or created more problems?
I think the answer would be yes to that question. I mean, because certainly there's been more and dependable foods for us to eat. However, the amount, the diversity of foods, which is what we really prefer, our bodies prefer, has been limited to a great degree. It got us through the tough times. At the end of the Ice Age, and I talk about this in my book, uh, where people had been tinkering with horticulture, with planting a few seeds, and then they'd migrate off and come back the next year and find, oh, hey, look, the magic worked, and here we have food now. The sacrifice worked, and they'd known about horticulture, of course, for a long time, but and as the Ice Age ended, um, climate warmed, things were good, times were good. And populations began to grow because they also had a little bit of that horticulture to use as well. And then suddenly, the planet flashed back into what's called the Younger Dryas. It was a bit of ice age that came back for 1,000 years. And there are various theories on why that might have happened, but suddenly our populations had grown up a little bit, and the climate changed in a pretty short period of time, and we were all relegated to these more feminine, lush environments, but more of us trying to eke out a living. And so suddenly we had to make horticulture work. And so we began to, and at that time too, there was, certainly plenty of so-called big game hunting that was going on too, to try to feed people. And that's what we did for, about 1,000 years. And it got us through those bad times. By the time that was all over, we had these larger populations. We were farmers. We began growing more food. We went back to eating mostly plant foods by that time. Um, the mineralogy in our bones tell us that. We were basically herbivores before, and we're mostly herbivores after. Yes, we ate the occasional this or that other animal too, but we were mostly herbivores. And we were only growing a handful of crops by that time, instead of the 150 varieties of different things that we had foraged. Suddenly we're down to 8 to 12 varieties of crops. And so less diversity. We were actually shorter in stature then. And our bones were not as tough, and they were more brittle, and we weren't living as long after we were horticultural agriculturalists. Um, and we lived long enough to have babies, and that's pretty much what enabled our populations to continue to increase, and depending more on those crops, but we were less healthy for it, and we began to suffer more dental, malocclusions and issues, dental caries and things like that with our teeth at that time too. after agriculture. So good and bad, I guess you could say.
Right.
More and
So
more
what,
people, but not as healthy.
right. Hopefully, what we can learn from that is that we need a big diversity of plants to
For
consume.
sure. For sure.
Variety is best, diversity is best.
For sure.
And humans aren't nice to other species. So we had more extinction of megafauna. You're right. All those big,
Right.
large animals we
Right.
hunted and they went
Right.
bye-bye.
Right.
And was that good or bad or just different? I don't know.
One could argue a lot of different points on that, but I would say bad. That
Yeah,
the megafauna,
bad.
they became extinct right after, about the time that the end of the Ice Age, when people were hunting them. They probably also couldn't keep up with the changes as fast as they were happening climatically, but, people were also hunting them out, in a lot of places too, contributed to their demise.
Okay, let's talk about that phrase, survival of the fittest,
Hmm.
and how more people are talking about how we do better when we cooperate.
Mhm. For sure. Survival of the fittest. So for this phrase, we go back to Charles Darwin, in the mid 19th century,
Not too
and
long ago.
not too awful long ago. And who first formulated evolution and by natural selection. And there are four main ways in which evolution occurs, but the first one being natural selection that he hit on. But and uh, he referred to this survival of the fittest, meaning for him, the way he wrote it was that the creatures who are most fit for their environment and therefore would have the most viable offspring, were the most fit. Not necessarily the biggest or strongest. In fact, only rarely is that the case. When the biggest or strongest, um, you know, uh, is the one to have the most offspring. Being strong and carnivorous and aggressive behaviors more often get you into trouble and could get you killed. And so you leave fewer offspring, and therefore being communal, being sociable, um, getting along with the locals is the best way, mostly in nature, for creatures to have more offspring, viable offspring, and live. And that's certainly been the case too with humans. We're originally we and continue to be a social species mostly. And that's where we come from. And that's what worked for us. That's what got us through the last ice age and through the hardest times of the last ice age, was helping each other out and being social.
Bonobos are very close to humans, and you talk a little bit about them and how they're much better than we are at cooperating.
Yes, yeah. So bonobos are interesting. They used to be called pygmy chimps, um, back in the day, but they are a separate species of primates, from chimpanzees, the common chimpanzees. Um, and common chimpanzees and bonobos, they look a lot alike until you begin to compare them side by side. They are subtly different. It's estimated that they branched off, their lines branched off in evolution about 1.8 million years ago. Chimpanzees live on the north side of the Congo River, bonobos on the south side of the Congo River. So at that time, this is about the time when the Congo River was establishing itself in the Ituri rainforest in Central Africa. And you had these populations, that were, separating and separated eventually by the Congo River. And bonobos and chimpanzees neither swim, so they couldn't go back and forth
Hmm.
and add their genes to the other gene pool over there. So they began to diverge. They began to speciate at that time. And we humans are equally related to both of them. We have 98.6% of our DNA is their DNA.
Hmm.
And uh, we, by the way, humans branched off from them about 7 or 8 million years ago from what the line that would become them, the bonobos and chimpanzees. Bonobos are much friendlier. They are altruistic. They share food with complete stranger bonobos. Um, they um, they uh, are matriarchal. Basically,
Mm.
the women rule the roost, and if a male steps out of line, well, the women are gonna keep him in line, show him where to get off. So um, they are very very friendly in that way, and they take care of each other. Um, they also have a lot of fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and things that they eat on the south side of the Congo. North side of the Congo is a more, can we say, masculine environment where there
Huh.
are fewer fruits and fewer nuts and fewer things to eat. Chimpanzees, while they do have a soft side, they're more often to create these gangs and go to war on the next chimpanzee group over. Um, and it's usually the males. It's more of a male-oriented society, can we say patriarchal? And they're they certainly would they don't share their food with other chimpanzees as often unless they're making alliances with your
They're
club.
making deals.
They're
Uh-huh.
making deals unless they're making, yeah, deals with the guys. Um, and interestingly too, chimpanzees eat 5 to 8% of their diet is meat. So they're mostly um, vegetarians, vegans, essentially. Bonobos, 2 to 3% of
Mm.
their diet is from meat. Okay, so again, what is that? Like 3, 4 times more meat is eaten by the chimpanzees than the bonobos, and the bonobos are more matriarchal. They live in a more feminine environment. Chimpanzees live in a more masculine environment, and they're patriarchal. Um, just adding up these factors, begins to tell us a story.
It's
So.
fascinating. And I think we all should know more about this because this is a great example in nature showing us how we can really improve ourselves and be the best that we possibly can. And as you explained, feminine and masculine before, it's not that we all need to be women or men, but we need to balance those traits more. And we've kind of gotten way too masculine. And it's making me think of Dr. T. Colin Campbell's The China Study, where he studied that vast population in China, which was, for all practical purposes, a uniform test group to test on because they were all Chinese, very similar genetically. And all across the country, some ate more meat and some ate less. They all ate at that point in time a lot less than we eat today. But he showed that any increase in animal products caused more chronic disease. And it looks like with these cases of the chimpanzees and the bonobos, an increase in meat, certainly not anywhere near what we're consuming today, but more means more masculine, more violent.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. That.
And what are we seeing today?
Oh, well, certainly, human groups. We are being coached, by popular media, popular culture, to eat in excess of 35%, you know, proteins, that is. And when people, of course, in the popular culture talk protein, when you want a protein added to your meal, what
They're
they're
implying meat, right?
implying meat. Do you want that chicken? Do you want the turkey? Do you want the fish? Like the protein. What do you? is what that's implying. And you know, whenever I'm asked that, I'm like, oh no, it's okay. That has quinoa in it. I'm good. You know. So um, certainly, yeah, we've moved towards such a meat bias that is violence biased culture and a way of getting our food. And all of that, of course, I think being driven by what I call in my book the hyper masculine paradigm. Now, I do want to make a point here that before we get too much farther along, and you've kind of alluded to it already, Karen, that, you know, so all of us, we're masculine, we're feminine, we're everything in between, depending on the day, depending on how old, wherever we are in the world. Masculine per se, there's nothing wrong with masculine per se. Okay, it's not bad to be masculine. You know, masculine has many valuable traits. Certainly, being assertive, getting things done, having, you know, order in the world. You know, and lots of great things that we could talk about with the masculine gender. Um, Again, that all of us have portions of. But when it becomes imbalanced, and that's all there is, and it's literally capitalized upon, then that's when we fall into an imbalance that creates issues in the world and problems from how we treat our own bodies, how we are not communicating in a peaceful way with other nations and states, how we are wreaking havoc on the natural world, Mother Earth, and of course on animals, on the other citizenry of our planet, when it becomes imbalanced like that.
I just want to say one more thing before we move away from bonobos and chimpanzees. And you talked about bonobos and their sexuality, which I found very interesting. Are are we maybe not meant to be monogamous? Would more
You know,
sex in different situations help us?
well, you know, it's interesting. I'm glad you bring that back up, Karen, because, you know, with bonobos, we mentioned, you know, they help each other, they get along. Well, certainly more than that, they have sex to form alliances, males with males, females with females, you know, and all across the, the sexual spectrum, and that they're forming these alliances and friendships, really. And and interestingly, bonobos, um, the difference between the males and females is not very great in size and strength.
Mm.
There is some, um, and I'd have to go back to my notes, but on the order of 20% or so difference. Okay. Same with chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are a little bit more of a difference there between males and females. Now, interestingly, with gorillas, gorillas have almost 2 to 1. A silverback male gorilla is almost twice as large and heavy as a female gorilla. Similar with orangutans as well. The male is almost twice as large as the female. Now with gorillas, that is, you know, you have one male and what scientists call a harem of females. Okay, so that's what's going on with with their residence patterns. With bonobos, it's very much, you know, multi-female, multi-male, and they're mixed. Okay, nobody's really much in charge. It's an egalitarian situation that they're all helping each other and and having sex with one another.
Mm.
And so, what would it be with humans? Well, if we look at human groups, and this is true back as far as we can measure with Homo sapiens sapiens, which goes back about 200,000 years, but human groups, males are about 16% 16% heavier, and 7% taller.
Hmm.
And that's across populations. Okay. And that's the world average. Certainly there are women who are much taller, stronger, bigger, whatever than some men across the populations too. But that's the global average we're talking about. So it's actually less. There's less of a difference. It's called sexual dimorphism in humans than there is even with bonobos or certainly chimpanzees and certainly with gorillas. And so one begins to wonder what does that mean as far as like either we're very, 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 very monogamous as a group all the way back, which is what, by the way, gibbons are. Gibbons, there's essentially no difference between males and females.
Hmm.
It's zero. And they are monogamous throughout their lives.
Ah.
So either we are very monogamous back all the way, or we are, you know, uh, sex, love, which way to Woodstock, right? It's how I think I put it and it's
Well, it's amazing that we can put together any sort of explanation or story for things that have happened so long ago. That just fascinates me. And I'm sure that some information we've retrieved from scientific research and experiment and observation have been wrong, and perhaps our objectivity improves over time, because certainly we're going to see something and put our own spin on our understanding of things to the explanation.
right.
But it's still fascinating. I want to talk about spirituality and religion. You've touched on it throughout the book. A couple of things. You talked about hyper-masculine gods a long time ago, and I was wondering if you thought they were created intentionally to make people afraid, and
I,
bring that forward to religion. Have we created that in some ways to make people afraid and obedient?
I do not doubt for a moment that it has been used more recently as a tactic, for sure, to create obedience, adherence in certain religions and in more recent centuries and millennia. Um, and I could bring up a few examples of that for sure. But I think if we go back around the time 6, 7, 8,000 years ago, um, and just as an aside, quickly here, you'll begin to see that my book spans quite. Beginning 60 to 70,000 years ago with the first things, and then 12,000 years ago, then 6,000 years ago, breaking it into these chunks. So 7,000 years ago, a couple things begin to happen. We begin to see the first really state level societies. We begin to see standing armies. We begin to see the first mass murders, and around that time too, and we also begin to see masculinity, hyper-masculinity coming to play in religions. The first hyper-masculine, what I would call hyper-masculine gods. And I think that I don't think that they were intentionally chosen so much as that it was a concept that evolved in cadence with the landscapes in which people were living at the time. The world had a wet period after the end of the Ice Age, and then it was beginning to dry out. We began to see the Sahara Desert forming and the Rub' al Khali in Arabia and places like that. And so people were using more masculine, hyper-masculine means by which to wrest a living from their environment. More pastoralism, more killing each other, and the gods began to reflect those harsh, punitive environments, and prior to this, what we see is a plethora of either goddess figurines and goddess figures drawn, carved, and also what's called therianthropic or mixed animal human um, deities. Um, but now we begin to see the masculine, hyper-masculine gods taking charge. And at that time, and the first monotheisms as well,
Mm.
beginning to emerge from some of the polytheisms. So we can see Zoroastrianism coming out, and we know it's binary, it's good and it's bad, and or it's bad. We begin to see Yahweh in the Jewish tradition, and of course God the Father in the Christian tradition, Allah later on, the same God with different names. Those monotheisms that were, um, how to put it, basically very aggressive and violent toward the neighbors, and that reflected, I think, in some ways the world in which the physical environment in which these groups were living as well.
Ooh, well done. Another thing I really liked, you mentioned early on when we didn't understand really anything, and especially how we reproduced, women had more power or more respect because they had the magic to
Right,
create babies because we didn't understand
right,
it took two.
right, right.
And then you wrote that man learns to create with words, and they could speak something into existence, create something into existence. And that tickled me because I think today about conspiracy theories and about how people politically are just saying things that aren't true, but then making them so. And I'm just wondering how that all connects, this power that came into existence with words.
Right, right. Very good. And Karen, you've taken it to a new level for me, like with the conspiracy. I I hadn't thought about that into the present moment, speaking imagination into
Exactly.
into existence. Certainly looking back again into prehistory, that's very, very hard. It was hard for me to wrap my head around at first, was this idea that really people at one time didn't get it, that so sex, man, woman has sex, and then a baby could be born. But apparently there are very, very clear instances of groups, even current day or near current day foragers, who didn't understand paternity, and that's where babies were born. Not exactly in the way that you and I think of it anyway, in the physical sexual act, but sometimes I think I mentioned Australian indigenous peoples who thought that a woman would need to go to a well, and she would be drawing water, and a spirit from the well would impregnate her, and they would question her after the fact, just to find out, well, which clan spirit might this have come from, so we know which clan your child will be part of now. Now, that happened right up, you know, into the early 20th century, that thinking. But I have to say though that the Australian indigenous folks realized too that for that to happen, the woman in their terms needed to be opened by a man in sex for that spiritual pregnancy to occur. So there's some kind of a notion there, but there are other examples too, of, um, of people's not realizing that paternity was a thing. Now, the current thinking goes that until the end of the Ice Age, paternity was basically not understood, not known. That's where babies came from. Yes, people had sex, and sometimes the woman got pregnant, and sometimes she didn't. They saw animals having sex all the time, and so what? And but not until after the Ice Age, when people began keeping animals and becoming pastoralists and noticing their estrus cycles and their reproductive cycles, and did they put two and two together and say, oh, this happens, and then a baby is born. And so at that point, that may have shifted the balance of power, began to shift the balance of power when people began to realize that, oh, hey, it's not just the women's magic, but I have magic as a man. I have magic too. I have a say here. And so that may have begun to shift the pattern in societies. Not all at once, not suddenly, but over a few millennia that may have begun to shift then away from the all controlling, all-encompassing goddess figures towards hyper-masculine gods, warlike gods.
I don't want to get into infertility, but I just want to mention that up until very recent times, men still blamed a lot of things on women, even though they knew their sperm fertilized the egg. They still blame the women on not being able to bear a son or even bear children at all, and not realizing that they might have had the problem.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. So some of that thinking persists or has persisted until recently. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So many things I want to talk about. Not enough time. But I
I'll
do
be
want to talk.
brief. I'll be brief.
No, no. It's all been good. Um, I want to talk about animal agriculture because this program is called It's All About Food. We mentioned briefly about foraging and hunger,
Yep.
a number of things, but when we're trying to solve so many problems today, and I don't even like saying solve problems today because I recently interviewed a woman who wrote a book, The Problem with Solutions, because so many solutions create more problems. But we want to improve our life here on Earth and minimize exploitation and pain and suffering and give all species an opportunity to live the way they're supposed to and thrive in cooperation and kindness. We've created this horrible system of animal agriculture, industrial animal agriculture, and you surmise that it's taken all of this history to get to this horribleness where we are today.
Hmm. Yes, horrific, really. And where we're at today, we're at a place. There's the statistic from 2022, make of it what you will, and I can't cite it correctly now, that of mammals on the Earth's surface, on the land surfaces, that 36% are humans now, over 8 billion of us, right? So 3.5 billion, by the way, when I was born. So
Yes.
and more than double. So 36%, 60% are livestock, and leaving 4% for wildlife, on mammals we're talking about on the
Yeah,
Earth's
those were
surface.
stunning numbers when they were reported.
Yes, yes. So make of that what you will, but that's just an incredible amount, and how much livestock. I mean, if nothing else, certainly the comparative proportions, say of livestock and and humans, um and how much human food that most of those livestock consume, and worldwide about 50%, all legumes and grains are fed to livestock. And here in the United States, 75% go to and that's more than just the inedible portions of the plants as for humans as well. And so we could end of the end of the story picture here is that we could feed so many more people on less land with less stuff if we didn't have all of this vast array of livestock that we were trying to support, and because we think we need it, we think that's who we are, and think that's who we are as a species and what we come from. Um,
And it's taken a long time, but we have convinced ourselves that treating other species so cruelly is okay because it's
we
efficient. It supports capitalism,
Sure,
and we know where that term came from, and it's all about the hierarchy and exploitation.
sure, sure.
The other thing is the tremendous number of guns, especially in the United States. And you reported these numbers, and I was just horrified. I thought, I got to get out of this country. There are too many guns here.
It's scary for sure. I mean, my wife and I have talked about half facetiously about moving to a more civilized country
But where is that,
somewhere. Where is
Bill?
that? Well, yeah, there are plenty actually, but I mean, in about what 4 or 5% of the world's population are here in the United States, yet the U.S. has between 40 and 45% of all personally owned firearms in the world. More than one per person in the United States. And all of that, I think that's a symptom of the hyper-masculine paradigm that has been sold and capitalized upon on this idea of fear. And that's where it goes back to, of course, is the insecure, hyper-masculine ego. And that's what that masculinity is ultimately afraid. It's
Mm.
going and it's becoming more afraid since it's being threatened from all sides, from, well, Karen, people like us, and, and lantern books, and so many that are beginning to say, hey, wait a minute, you're not looking at the whole picture. And it's pulling back, it's saying, put up your dukes, and it's going to fight back more. And so that's what we're seeing more and more of, certainly, is warfare in the world, terrorism exported to other places as we move warfare around the world, um, and certainly the barbaric slaughter and consumption of animals around the world, and that's not who we are originally, even as a species. We're herbivores with the ability, we're very adaptable, so we can be omnivorous if we need to in a pinch, but we're basically built as herbivores. And I could go into all of the physiology behind that, but it's hard not only on us, our health, um, pretending not to be herbivores, but it's certainly hard on the animals. It's hard on the environment, and on and on.
As I said in the beginning, your book ends hopeful. You talked about how the Earth was once one landmass and then through time separated into these different plates. And we've become separated as a people. And technology has helped us reconnect and become more global. And the question is, can we or shall we evolve to have no more boundaries? I think that's where we want to go for many reasons. And you also talk about stories, and you've weaved into your book numerous stories, myths, beliefs that have come through culture and what they mean, and how we can write new stories and how important that is. So I just want to wrap up this wonderful conversation with some of those thoughts.
Right. Well, thank you, Karen. I appreciate you bringing that up. The portion of fairy tales, myths, stories that have always been part of human culture in sharing information between peoples around a campfire, or what when's the best time to plant or do whatever. How these stories have been there are some very ancient archetypes in some of the common stories that we have today. I think I mentioned Rapunzel, all of the symbols, the maiden in the tower archetype, and how so much of those original stories and themes have been layered upon and altered over the centuries and millennia. Um, and as well, the hypermasculine paradigm has seen fit to rewrite them for its own purposes, um, for religious purposes, for social purposes, what have you. Um, and yes, again, these are our stories. These are the stories that can be again rewritten. We can write our own stories. We are that species that is, somewhere between maybe chimpanzees and bonobos. Right? Desmond Morris is the third chimpanzee, but um, and we can what do we want to do? We can choose. We are mostly a cultural species. We can choose to do what we want to do, what we need to do, what we decide to do as a community. And that's who we are originally, a community. And so recognizing that basic thing that lives in all of us, that we are a community and that we can write our own new story together, makes for a pretty hopeful future. And we can get there this century, I think.
Thank you, Bill Hatcher. I appreciate wrapping it up that way. Hopeful, inspirational. Let's become a better community for ourselves and all life on Earth. And good luck with your book, The Red Planet, Gendered Landscapes and Violent Equalities. I hope many, many people read it, digest it, understand it, and get motivated to do
Great.
good.
Thank
Again,
you
thank
so
you
much,
for joining
Karen.
me on It's All About Food. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. That wraps up another episode of It's All About Food. Once again, it comes back to us. It's up to us to create community and take care of this planet that we live on, our only home. And we can do that deliciously, right? There are so many wonderful recipes out there in books, online. We have many at our nonprofit website, responsibleeatingandliving.com. This life, this plant-based diet that protects our health, the health of the planet, and is kind to animals is really the way to go. That's my message today. Have a great week, everybody. Have a delicious week. Bye-bye.